Dear colleagues and guests, you are very warmly welcome to IVA, to the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. I'm really pleased to see so many international guests here today. And I'm also very happy for the second time, or maybe the third time already, today to welcome Director Gerard Sheehan, that earlier today already presented the OECD Science, Technology and Innovation Outlook 2023, and he will now continue to talk about international collaboration and also science diplomacy, which is the theme for tonight. So as many of you know, IVA was founded in 1919, and from the very, very beginning of our journey, we have promoted and cherished international relations and cooperation. Our first international fellow was elected in 1924, 5 years only after the Academy was founded. And since then, we have been busy building international networks and have also helped to establish national academies in other countries such as Japan and Korea. It was also IVA that first nominated what we called attachés for international technology scouting, which is an activity that later gave rise to the science and innovation offices that today operate under the Swedish government. IVA's first counselor was sent out after the Second World War under a different name, but with the same idea: knowledge exchange and strong international relations. We see a lot of good evidence today about this kind of promotion of our international relations. Our topic today is science diplomacy, which is, of course, as we all know, much more complex today than it was for many years ago. It goes a little bit up and down with different kinds of wars and events that happen in the world, but it is very, very pertinent and very timely just at now. And so we hope that this discussion today can point out the direction of how Sweden can leverage science diplomacy to further strengthen the global standing of our country and also contribute to scientific advancement and economic growth. International relations that we more or less also have confirmed today are very important in this kind of development. There are very few countries that can do it on their own these days. So once again, welcome all. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to our fellow Ann Lidgard, Head of International Cooperation at the innovation agency Vinnova. She has a long experience in international collaboration, and she is the one who established the Nordic Innovation House in Silicon Valley, among other things. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tula. Thank you for that introduction. I'm also a proud fellow of IVA, the Division 7, which is basic and interdisciplinary research. Science. Again, a warm welcome. We have gathered for you this afternoon a number of speakers that I'm sure you'll find extremely relevant for the topic at hand. And I'm sure that they will help us shine the light on how current events actually influence and affect now what the implications are for science diplomacy in the global context. And I hope also that we will walk away this afternoon with a little more insight also on Sweden's response and role in comparison to other countries. So I will guide you through this afternoon. We have exactly 55 minutes. I also want to say hi to everybody out there that is looking at this streaming. I'm very glad that you also can attend this at a distance. First, our first speaker, some of you were here this morning, some of you were not. In that case, you're very lucky that we also have the Director of OECD for Science, Technology and Innovation, Gerard Sheehan, and he will give us some main takeaways from the OECD STI Outlook, I expect. So please, give a warm welcome to
Okay, thank you all, and thank you for a second opportunity to come here and speak to you at the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. I will apologize in advance. I'm going to do a little bit on this topic of scientific diplomacy. I'm going to do a little bit of what we call shuttle diplomacy, which means I'll make a few remarks, and then I'm going to have to shuttle out the door and get on a plane back to Paris, where I'll be engaging in some other international discussions about science and technology policy over the course of the next few days. For those who were here this morning, I think you'll have a little bit of a summary already of some of the comments that I can make from the perspective of the new science, technology, and industry outlook, innovation outlook, that relate to issues of scientific diplomacy and international relationships. I'll just posit that I think there are several different views and definitions even of what scientific diplomacy is, and it may be helpful in the rest of the discussions that I won't be able to participate in to keep those in mind, right? There are sometimes we use diplomacy to advance our scientific objectives and our goals. There's a scientific need that we have, whether it's about addressing research around artificial intelligence, around climate change and decarbonization, where we need international cooperation and collaboration to make progress. There are other times where we use science in support of our political and diplomatic aims, to create new relationships between or strengthen relationships between countries using science, which, as we know, has a very international context to it. And the scientific community has always, I think, worked in open and international ways. And then, of course, there are programs that we've seen in some countries and in some regions about using scientists as diplomats, right? As ones who can help bridge the connect between science and diplomacy. I think all of these kinds of scientific diplomacy are increasingly important in today's world, partly because we're beginning to use science more to support societal needs on great global challenges. If you heard me speaking this morning, you know, we talked about the role of science, technology, and innovation in supporting our pandemic response during COVID-19. And we know we're going to need to mobilize it again in order to address whatever the next crisis will be, whether it's another emerging infectious disease, whether it's related to climate change, whether it's around food security, energy security, you name it. We're going to need to use science and technology to help us solve these challenges, which are inherently global. And that will involve diplomacy and coordination among countries. It's going to be increasingly important, it's already increasingly important as we start dealing with the challenges associated with climate, where we need to both reinvigorate our science, technology, and innovation systems to develop and deploy some of the technical solutions that we can around areas such as decarbonization, alternative energy sources, and more, other forms of greening. But we can't just do this in the context of an individual country. We need to try to pursue these types of agreements, this type of scientific and technical advance across with global partners. Of course, we're also seeing this now in the context of greater geopolitical challenges in our countries. We've had a science system that has largely been based on openness, transparency, sharing of information amongst those in the scientific community. We've developed technological networks that cross national borders. We have value chains for our industrial development that are of course, also based on extensive international and global partnerships. But there are growing concerns that perhaps not all participants in this STI, complex interwoven international system, necessarily play by the same rules. Right? We've been hearing more calls for work with those who have shared values. There are shared values within the OECD member countries with whom we work. There are shared values that we try to extend to other non-OECD member countries through partnerships and different types of fora for engagement to try to ensure fair, equitable, inclusive science, technology, and innovation, try to maintain the integrity of our scientific and technical and innovation systems. And sometimes these have been challenged and strained. And we've seen countries taking different approaches now toward technological sovereignty, trying to limit the exchanges of information in certain scientific and technical fields, trying to ring fence and build up their own science, technology, and innovation systems, and as well then in trying to form, though, new international partnerships, again, among countries with shared values with whom we can work to advance innovation. This is being tied together as well with an increasing focus on emerging technologies, whether this is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, or biological engineering kinds of systems, where there are new opportunities and what are often perceived as new risks and threats associated with these technologies. We need and are looking for new forms of governance, technology governance, that can help accelerate the development of these technologies, but influence the direction that they take to ones that, again, will be reflective of our shared sets of values, will be ones that give us the greatest benefit and minimize some of the risks. We see this around interest in artificial intelligence now, which we know can improve productivity, can improve the way we teach, we train, we interact with each other. We know at the same time it can cause changes in the labor force. It'll have new demands for the types of skills that our workers are going to need. We need to work together to ensure that we have policy frameworks, regulatory systems that help us channel artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and others in directions that will give us the most benefit that we can find. This will have to take place in an international context, given the degree to which these technologies are global in their reach. The companies that develop them, many of them are global in their reach, and of course the scientific community is global in their reach. So I think what we're seeing is science diplomacy, science society, science and policy being increasingly intertwined. We need to find new and better mechanisms for working together, both, I think, bilaterally between countries that have shared commitments and through multinational organizations. I, of course, not surprisingly, see the OECD as one of the organizations that can help play a role in that approach. We'll be trying to do this through upcoming ministerial level meetings that we're going to be holding next year in April that will focus on, among others, areas for frameworks for improving technology governance in international ways, where we'll be working on frameworks for helping use the STI system to help us address global challenges in an international context. So with this will become opportunities to also engage beyond the OECD countries. We've been setting up new types of fora, a new global forum on technology, explicitly established to help engage non-member countries in the OECD, stakeholders, including researchers and businesses and policymakers and others, to better understand, anticipate some of the challenges that new technologies will face and help us come up with solutions. This is going to bring scientists and policymakers together. It's going to bring science and international dimensions together much more closely. I think in that shared environment, we need to share our lessons better about effective ways to move forward, try to develop practical frameworks and toolkits that will help us make progress on these. I think with this, we can envision, again, science, society, policy, and international relations all again coming together in ways that will help advance our broader agendas, help us address climate change, help us get a handle on new technologies, and help us move into an era of more mission-oriented research. I'm going to wish you a good rest of your conversation today. I thank you again, the organizers, for inviting me to make some remarks here today, and I'll encourage you to engage with OECD, read our STI Outlook, and I look forward to having an opportunity to address you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for setting the stage for us. Thank you very much, and have a great flight.
Thank you. I wish you a good discussion tonight.
Thank you. So moving on now. Now we have the pleasure of having our true science and innovation, science and technology diplomats here today. And I'd like to invite the three of you who are here up. It's Marika Amarty, who is in the UK, Maria Brokgren in the United States, Washington, D.C., and also Jan-Erik, Per-Arne Wikström, sorry.
I think that was a actor,
yes.
Jan-Erik Wikström, or a singer or something.
You know, you always do these, you know, Freudian slips or whatever you might call them. Anyway, most welcome. So I'd like to start with you, Marika. I mean, you are active in the UK, which is really a superpower when it comes to science, and also has a long tradition of science diplomacy. Could you please share a little bit of what you see, how the UK is actually working in this field with science and diplomacy?
I would love to. Sorry, Freudian slip.
What an evening!
Yes, this is an interesting topic to be representing Sweden in the UK. The UK are experts in this field, I would say. They are experts because they are very proud of their science diplomacy and their science diplomats. I know that we have at least one of them in the audience today. Sweden there's 7 of us in the world. The UK has 70 science diplomats. In 70 countries, and that's about 145 staff. So, you know, the muscles are there, and they are taking this very seriously. Regarding my British colleagues in Stockholm, we speak a lot to each other because we have the same mission to strengthen the bilateral relationship between Sweden and the UK in science, innovation, and technology. So it's very natural for us to talk, and we do collaborate among many topics and projects. I told the audience this morning that the UK has a new department for science, technology, and innovation. I also told the audience that they have identified 5 critical technologies that they will prioritize for economic growth. Those 5 technologies are AI, quantum, semiconductors, engineering, biology, and future telecommunications. And this is the interesting part. Every technology has an international collaboration strategy with it. One great example is the ambition of the UK to take lead in the AI development and the AI security discussion globally. And they've done this in a very practical way. They have decided to host an AI summit on security in England in November. They will invite a selected few to this, and it remains to be seen which they are. But it's a very good example of how they turn science diplomacy into something practical. The UK is very good at identifying countries' strengths and draw up bilateral agreements with those countries. We see this particularly after they left the EU, but this is not new for them. And just to finalize, with Sweden, we have a very interesting MOU on the life sciences. Sweden is a small country in this area, but we are very strong and we have a very fast innovation pace. And the UK has really picked up on this. And we work regularly talking and getting the life sciences sector together from both countries. It's a very good example of how we create bilateral platforms for dialogue for interesting sectors. There's another one coming up. The Swedish Prime Minister visited the UK in June this year, and they decided to do a joint agreement on a strategic partnership between Sweden and the UK. We are filling this agreement with content as we speak, and it remains to be seen what we do with that as well.
Very exciting, yeah, and I know that even fusion was specifically mentioned in this context, which is quite extraordinary. I mean, that's really looking, to some...
Fusion is very interesting, and this is a country, the UK, that have really the strengths within this area. They have, because they were hosting JET for so many years, they have the facilities, they have the international clusters, they have a fusion strategy, and they have a unit dealing only with fusion development in their government.
And interestingly enough, now we won't dwell too long on fusion, but what I found extraordinary there is that they're even now not just doing research on the apparatus itself, but actually how do you build a whole plant around fusion? And that shows the optimism and the planning that there. But thank you very much. That's excellent. Thank you. Now, we've learned that UK has quite large ambitions here, and also large. Handing over to you, Per-Arne, you are in a country that has long relationships with the UK, namely India. Can you piggyback on the UK in certain ways, since they are so forthcoming and forward-looking. Or tell us a little bit of how you work there.
Yeah, so that's it's really an interesting question. How do we collaborate with other countries and other actors in the countries where we are? I mean, as Marika said, we're the 7 of us that work with science diplomacy, and when it comes to UK, of course, that's a major player, both with the history that they have in India, but also as such, as a big economy, and with also a strong research background. I'm in discussions with the UK regularly on different areas where we and the UK can, go together and initiate collaboration with India. One area that we've discussed, just to give you an example, is we're doing something that we call SheSTEM to promote the STEM subjects to women in India. That's a thing that we're doing together. But there are also a lot of other areas, critical minerals, we talked about that today, wind, the use of wind for energy, that we could do that together with Denmark as well, of course. We have also in general regional and innovation collaboration, how we can organize different schemes when it comes to setting up incubators and setting up incubator programs with Innovate UK, for instance. So we have a lot of possibilities to collaborate here, but I would also add to that when you work with science diplomacy, you need to have contacts all the time with a lot of different stakeholders. And in India, with this booming economy, you don't really know in which direction they will go. We know that they're really into circular economy. They're interested in Sweden because we're strong on innovation and sustainability in a general sense. But what I do is, I mean, of course, I am in dialogue with the UK, but I'm very much in dialogue with the EU and the different competitors within the EU, because it's like a race that we are on here. But the means that we use is someone said this morning that Sweden is small and smart. Yeah. And that is to work together with other countries. I would also like to mention that we, with the Indian ministries, and that will be the same for everyone here, that we have a lot of contacts, regularly contacts, just to know what's going on and to build relationships. And I would say that we had a lot of impact in the G20, because India was the heads, or what do you call that, chair of the G20 this spring, while we were chairing the EU. And because of our good relationship with both the EU delegation in Delhi and with the G20, we, only the tiny Office of Science Innovation that I represent, we were asked to give 7 speeches and 2 keynotes in this setting. And that is really to make an impact on a global stage where we weren't really invited from the beginning, right? But since we were chairing the EU during that period, we could do that. The Nordics, I'll finish soon.
No, go ahead. We're fine.
The Nordics is also an interesting group of countries, because we are also competitors, but we realize that sometimes India looks upon us as maybe the best case in the world when it comes to innovation, sustainability-related aspect. But since we are small, they suggest to us sometimes, maybe you could do this with Denmark and Finland and Norway, and then we can do that. So we can join hands. So for instance, we had a road trip on circular economy last year together with the Nordic countries and collaborated with them. And we are also doing higher education and research joint activities together with them in India to join hands. So basically, if you ask me how we work and if we piggyback on the UK, of course we do. But we do it with all the other ones as well, where we find it, where we have some ethical, moral ground that is shared with them, of course.
Well, that's the smart, right? You have to be smart about these things. So, Maria, moving to a different continent now, the United States. Please share a little bit about how the US is working with science diplomacy. What do you see? And also, well, go ahead.
What's going on in
what's
Washington.
going on? What's going on?
I
What's
would
cooking?
say that Washington, D.C. is really the epicenter of global science diplomacy. It's really extremely interesting to be there as a science diplomat. And everyone is there, and we are collaborating in different constellations. And but with that said, the US is really, I mean, they're extremely professional, strategic in this field. And this morning we talked about 3 different approaches to for countries to protect their technological leadership and so on. Those are also related to science diplomacy, and I would say that the US really excels in all these 3 tools. And we're talking about protection, promotion, and projection, where projection means finding the right partners to do strategic partners for topics that you need to get done. And that the US is really strategically choosing international collaboration partners for different areas. For example, quantum technology, where they have sort of chosen 11 countries to bilaterally collaborate with. So that is one tool. Another tool that the US is using are the Science and Technology Agreement, which they have with 60 countries. And I mean, everyone wants to collaborate with the US, so they can also choose. Actually, we were interviewing the colleague at the State Department about how they are working and what their mission is. And he said explicitly that their mission, and I should also say that at US embassies abroad, they have officers that work with the portfolio environment, science, technology, and health. And in that portfolio, there can be, several diplomats or one. It depends on the size of the country. But their mission in the science field is to promote and protect American scientific leadership. So that is one part of the mission. And the other is to use science, technology, and innovation to advance American foreign policy. So it's really the dual purpose of science diplomacy. And I think that it is that complex. It's only it's not only one and the other. So that's about the US. Then I also want, since I am in Washington and learning from other colleagues in this field, I want to mention France, which are also very mature when it comes to science diplomacy. And in Washington, D.C., they have one science counselor leading the team, and then they have specialists for different scientific fields, because they really go in digging deep and understanding exactly on what do we want to collaborate with the US. So I think they have 20 science attachés around the US.
Interesting. Well, you certainly have very challenging jobs, but could you maybe just share with us what are some of the hurdles or challenges that you experience during the course of the work that you do out there? Do you want to?
One of the biggest challenges for the last 2 years have probably been the quite frosty relationship between UK and the EU. And to navigate this new political landscape, both trying to promote the bilateral relation between Sweden and the UK, and also having the EU solidarity. That has been quite a challenge. But here we have worked very closely with the EU delegation in London and have an open, transparent dialogue with them, in particular when we signed the agreement on the MOU for life sciences. So that's one challenge that I can give.
Thank you. How about you, Per-Arne?
I would maybe point towards the scarcity of resources then, because it's a very fragile system that we have. It's if we're looking at, I'm just looking at my office now. It's myself and then a senior advisor, a local person, and of course, if someone of us is sick or needs to go, it's a very fragile scientific counselor system that we have. As you heard here, there are other countries have a lot more resources. So that's one obvious one. But another one is that it also takes some time to build relationships with different stakeholders in the different contexts where we are working. And especially in a country like India, where you really need to focus on relationship building.
Yes.
So it's a very crucial thing. You really need to do that. And that, of course, takes some time to do. And unless you have that, then you can't do anything really in India. It's probably different in other countries, so we have a different context here. But that's something that I mean, now we've overcome it. So I've been there for 2 years. So now I know the people that I need to know. But in the beginning, it takes some time to build trust and relations.
Yeah, totally. I totally understand that. And how about you, Maria, in Washington, D.C.?
I must say that I think it was quite easy to get into the network, and also thanks to my predecessor, Henrik Jonsson, who was there before. So I mean, we have these, we have the connections already, and also there is a great interest from the US in collaborating with Sweden. They know that we are an innovative country, and they also know what they want to collaborate with us on, where our strengths are, perhaps more than we don't usually pick winners, but they know, and they also know what they want from us, what they lack. And also with what's happening now in Europe and the NATO application, we have become even more interesting as partners, as trusted partners to the US. Sure. So I would say that is, from my side, the challenge is that there are so many opportunities actually to collaborate. So we, from the Swedish side, need to show, and we need to have the resources in Sweden to handle this and to prioritize.
Right, and to be equally strategic back in the relationship. I totally understand that.
So I forgot mentioning one tool that we have that is very efficient in order to establish these contacts, and that is Team Sweden. To me, Team Sweden has been of enormous value, because I have within Team Sweden in Delhi, we meet every week, the embassy, the trade commissioner from Business Sweden, and the Chamber of Commerce. We have contacts with different Swedish stakeholders, and that makes us stronger. That's a mean that we have in order to become, the situation is not that fragile because of that.
And from Vinnova, we're also very happy about the collaboration that we have with you.
That's also every week.
Absolutely. Yeah. Please, Marika.
No, I also wanted to mention a few networks in the UK. The French, as in the US, are very active, and they have a diplomacy club where they organize events and take us on trips. We also try to get out of London. London is rather overwhelming, and there's so much happening there. But we are interested to understand innovation and research ecosystems in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales as well. And the EU delegation invite all the science diplomats once a month to update us on current affairs, in particular when it's come to the Horizon negotiations. So that's also very helpful to get straight into those networks. My Finnish, just mentioned the Nordic network, my Finnish colleague and I started at the same time. 6 months after, Norway decided to also second a science diplomat. And we are also collaborating a lot. It's very nice to analyze new policies, and when we do the political reporting, to discuss with like-minded countries and colleagues, are we interpreting this the right way? How will our countries receive this information? So it's very helpful. On an informal note, I have put myself on the board of the Swedish Association for Engineers in the UK. It's a small but lovely organization, and I have decided that when I rotate, the next person, the next diplomat that will come along will take over my position on the board. And that's a way to,
excellent. Yeah.
to reach maybe on the field researchers and engineers that are active in the country.
That's a brilliant idea. So just one last quick flash round here. What if you had a wish list, what would you ask for from the Swedish side, which would make your job easier? Per-Arne.
A wish list?
Yes.
Oh, that's a long list.
No, just top one. What's on the top?
I think that, okay, so a humble request then would be to contact us and realize that we have a very good access to all our countries where we work in terms of science and innovation. We have excellent contacts, and so if you want to do anything within that field, that's not a wish list.
That's a shout out.
That's a shout out.
There, shout out.
Yeah.
Great, Maria.
Well, my wish or the shout out would be to get the wish list from Sweden. What do you want? What do we want with the collaboration with the US?
So more strategic demands.
Some priorities.
Absolutely, priorities. And how about you?
No, it's absolutely true. What really facilitated the work with the MOU for Life Sciences was that we could match the sites. So we had a life sciences office in both Sweden and the UK. We had a life sciences strategy in both Sweden and the UK. And we could see our strengths immediately by analyzing that. And the problem is that the UK have so many national strategies, so it would be impossible. But I think that's one way forward.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Please have a seat. So let me invite up to the stage the participants in our next panel. Professor Sylvia Schwag-Serga from Lund University, our own Swedish domestic expert on international innovation policy, also an IVA fellow. Sylvia. Martin Beck, senior advisor at the Danish Academy of Technical Sciences, and also very relevant for the topic today. You were formerly the Science and Innovation Counselor at Innovation Center Denmark in Shanghai. And last but definitely not least, Beate Eland, Deputy Director at the Ministry of Education and Research. Welcome everyone up to the stage. Sylvia, maybe I'll start with you. So I did, as I do sometimes, I go to Google Search Analytics, and I looked up the term science diplomacy. And found that the intensity of the searches has actually been more or less flat for past 10 or 15 years. But still, we have the impression that this is something that's really very much talked about now today, and it's very much on the agenda. So what's going on? What is happening?
I think it's definitely become a very much discussed topic in a lot of circles, and you can see a lot of countries today struggling actually, because one of my comments from what we've heard so far, which has been very interesting, is that I think so far we've heard quite a lot about when science and diplomacy mutually reinforce each other in a positive way. But what is happening now is that the geopolitical landscape is changing. And at the risk of repeating myself, I think the two quotes from Xi Jinping this morning where he said, "We will win the battle in key core technologies," and then the quote from the American senator where he says, "Global technology competition is the geopolitical issue of our times," shows that technology and science, the relationship between technology and science on the one hand, and diplomacy is changing quite fundamentally. And you can actually see the EU Commission for the first time held a ministerial meeting under the first, for the research ministers under the Spanish presidency on the theme of science diplomacy. Countries like Austria, Colombia, a wide range of countries, Germany, are starting to formulate strategies. It's interesting because the German government calls it Außenwissenschaftspolitik, which means foreign science policy, which is something different. But I think it is definitely becoming an issue, and particularly not in the sense when the two reinforce each other, but when they're actually in conflict. And there is also some controversy. So I've been doing a lot. I used to be the chair of STINT, the Swedish Foundation for International Collaboration in Higher Education and Research. And together with our CEO, Andreas Jotenberg, we just realized that this topic is really gaining prominence, and it's not a totally unproblematic issue because academia tends to sometimes feel instrumentalized. that their science is not really what matters, but it's more the diplomatic signals it's sending. So I think these things are things that we have to grapple with and that make this topic quite difficult, I would say, and not well defined.
Yeah, absolutely. And Martin, you were in China for how many years were you there?
6 altogether, but not all of it for the foreign ministry.
So could you reflect a little bit on your work and your time back then, and how it's now sort of, has it changed? And just like Sylvia saying, how do you perceive the changes?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think in many ways it's interesting to reflect back to when I was taking up the position, because the Innovation Center in Shanghai. Sorry. Oh, sorry. So the Innovation Center in Shanghai was established around the time of 2007, which is quite a long time ago. And when I took up the position in Shanghai, the Innovation Center, in 2017, I was asked by my boss to sort of briefly evaluate the performance of the center. And my initial reflection was to say that, well, actually, I think we were quite at the forefront when we established this type of collaboration with China already back in 2007. And then in 2017, it was actually spot on to be in China to work with innovation. That was the time when we were saying, oh, China can innovate, and we need to be there, we need to learn from China. And then only a handful of years passed. It's a completely different situation, and we're definitely in Denmark waking up to the fact that some of the relationships we have had have been, I wouldn't say problematic, but at least something that needed to be looked at more closely. And so there's been a push in recent years from the ministry to ask the universities to do this, set up guidelines, and also be more stringent in how they establish and how they go about collaborating, not just with China, but in generally when we talk international collaboration.
Yeah, there's so much talk now about responsible internationalization, etc. And you touched upon it a little bit, Sylvia, and I know that you also can tell us a little bit about the experiences in Denmark, but you are also in a university. How are the researchers responding to what's going on?
I think
now?
I think it's a really difficult issue because, as I said, I mean, I think academia has sort of come to the realization, in a way we lived in this age of innocence of international collaboration where all scientific collaboration was seen as beneficial, international. And now I think academia is at this point where it has to decide, are we able to decide for ourselves which collaborations are good or not? Or do we need the help of others? Like guidelines, so again, I mean, with STINT, we produced, I think, one of the first guidelines in Europe on responsible internationalization. And I think it's not an easy question to answer. It depends also a lot on the different disciplines. But it is a stress factor, I would definitely say, for academia right now. And different countries handle it differently. And also the big question is, for example, how research funders handle this issue. So there's different actors in this game, and it's far from exhausted. Like I would say we don't have a good approach to science diplomacy.
So we're just starting
scratch
the surface of
and I would like to and I would like to just say one more thing because we're taking a delegation to STINT is taking a delegation to Brussels next week to talk precisely about this topic. And when I talked to the European Commission and I said, what do you think about science diplomacy? It was really interesting because they said, and I'm not going to name the person, but they said Sweden is an interesting case because we find very few people in the foreign ministry that talk about science or that actually are deeply knowledgeable about science. Now, that's their opinion. I'm not saying it's my opinion, but I thought that was an interesting reflection.
Absolutely. Martin, how about what's going on in Denmark now at the universities?
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a reflection to what Sylvia said because you said whether or not internationalization can be left to the universities at this point in time. In the Danish context, I think I can safely say that the opinion of the politicians and the central administration is, to some extent, that it cannot. And so the guidelines are being made, and the universities are being asked to change their mindset about how they collaborate internationally. And obviously also the presidents of the universities are saying it's not up to us to make foreign policy. The politicians need to do that, and the foreign ministry needs to do that. So the interesting point, of course, here is that politics outrank science policy, and science policy, I think, is to some extent, as you also mentioned, a tool of policy. You also had a lot of money floating around on the back of the screen here earlier, and I think that's a point also. Having worked as an attaché, I sometimes felt that science diplomacy was a little bit of an appendix to the more commercial aspects of bilateral collaboration. But I think also with the OECD presentation earlier today, this might be changing a little bit. And actually, I'm hopeful towards that end to say that with the focus on technology that's increasingly being discussed, both bilaterally, multilaterally, it's an opportunity for universities to get some skin in the game and play a role in relation to science policy and step up in this respect. And I think you and I spoke briefly in the doorway to say that maybe this is also an opportunity for Nordic collaboration because we really don't know how to go about this. Yeah. There is a need for thought leadership of some sort in terms of how science policy, science diplomacy is going to develop. And I'd really like to see that happening in a Nordic context. Yeah.
Obviously, there's a great risk at hand. I mean, isolationist types of theories or even dogmas have never really succeeded throughout history, right? And so to find that balance between awareness and still openness and also the liberty of the university, of the academic sector. But then you also mentioned the funders, funding organizations in this context, of obviously that have a say because they can set requirements on what they like to fund or not. I mean, it's a complex game we're playing here, right?
It is, and just also because I used to be in charge of science and technology collaboration when I was at Vinnova, for example, with China, and it's interesting what signals certain, a bilateral agreement or a bilateral program sends signals to researchers that this is a desirable collaboration, and also that this is something that is sort of framed in a larger context, and it's really important to think about these signals today. I'm not saying, I really think we have to reevaluate. This all was a lot easier, like you said, just when we were both operating in China like 10 years ago. So it's very different today.
Please, would you like to come in with some comments from the ministry on these issues?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to take part in this panel, and also for giving me the possibility to share a few words from the government offices on this very important topic. And like you mentioned, and we have been talking about today, science diplomacy is not new. We all know that, but it has received increased attention and interest since the last 10 to 20 years. And today, we are living in times when the pandemic, we have a horrible war in Europe, in parallel with climate change, the digital transformation, strategic global competition, and a growing geopolitical tensions. It has really put science diplomacy in a new context. And in these times, we need to consider deeply how international research and innovation cooperation can continue and also be strengthened through, and I would like to say, a realistic view on science diplomacy. Where security and openness can be balanced. And we need to do this because both now, during times of war and conflict, but maybe even more important, after. So especially looking at the war in Ukraine and so on. A few words about Sweden. There is no formal Swedish strategy or policy for scientific diplomacy. We know that. However, I mean, we have the 7 offices of science and innovation in strategic countries, important for Sweden. And we also have our Counselor of Research and Space Affairs in Brussels. And these are existing infrastructures aimed at supporting science diplomacy of Sweden. Other examples are the bilateral agreements we have in place, and we will continue to work with other countries. And research and innovation constitute a main area of cooperation in these bilateral agreements. And you mentioned STINT, and I also want to mention STINT as an important actor here. And you also mentioned the EU, and I think this is really interesting because the EU is, they are putting themselves in the forefront. And we have the global approach for research and innovation. We have EU strategy for international cooperation, and what we can see there is a strong advocating for focus on science and technology in the EU's foreign and security policies in terms of science diplomacy, and that is a way to help the EU to project soft power. So we're talking about soft power here. I think that's important. And let me just, I mean, I can say a lot, but I will keep it within the government office's frame. And let me just conclude then, but when implementing science diplomacy, we really have to put the shared values for research and innovation into consideration. And we need to put openness and transparency, integrity and security, but freedom, excellence, and equality should be put in focus here. And any activities, I think, should be well anchored and discussed broadly to include multiple perspectives on the definition and the practical use of science diplomacy. So I'll just stop there. Yes,
thank you. Thank you very much. Would you like to add or reflect on what we just heard from?
Will you go first, please?
Yeah, I can just say I really like, because I think you made some really relevant points, and one of them is the EU approach has been very much focused on values, but I think it's very important what you just did, which is to actually be specific about the values, because one of the reactions I get when I talk about when I talk in other countries is that non-EU countries sometimes find this very exclusive, you know, like excluding, to say we focus on values. It's as if only Europe has values, and I think, and then it becomes sort of not very, you can't grasp it. I think it's very important to say what values we're talking about, which is freedom of speech, which is democracy, which is ethics. We could also say very honestly that there have been scientific collaborations going on with certain countries that haven't really followed ethical guidelines before, but now there's a totally different sensitivity towards that. So that's just what I would say.
And I think, which was mentioned earlier now with the OECD initiative coming up here in April, I think it's extremely important that we, through science diplomacy and also through partnerships and countries, address these really difficult challenges that we have with emerging technologies and the implications that they may have for our future societies. So I think we see, as far as I can see, and I think this conversation has shown it pretty precisely, that there are these two faces of science diplomacy. One is really to promote the own national interests, which in some countries is really the supremacy, the technology supremacy, etc., and keep that in mind. And the other one is to really together, we need to work together to address the global challenges. And so I think from Sweden's perspective, where do you think that we are in this context?
Well, as I said, there's no Swedish strategy, but of course, I mean, not the least because it's been discussed in the EU, and I mean the Spanish presidency has put science diplomacy quite high up on the agenda. There will be a conference in December. They're heading for a plan or something, a European plan for science diplomacy. Of course, we are talking a lot about it, and it's a hot topic, but it's nothing new, and we also have to, I mean, science diplomacy in one way or another crosses the boundaries between science and foreign policy, but it should also be an equal relationship, and you were talking about the foreign ministry, and I'm representing the Ministry of Education and Research, and of course, I think it is also important that we within the government offices continue this dialogue with other ministries, because that is what science diplomacy actually does. It raises the importance of dialogue and collaboration, and with different parts, of course. Also, it should not just be the scientists should not bear this on their own shoulders, because it's difficult as it is today. And I'm just throwing in the dual use part here. I mean, yeah,
absolutely.
Even if we're not discussing it only in the terms of science diplomacy, it's all over.
Yes.
Because it's about these values, and it's also about science for policy. Where are we there? What do we want? So I'm not a politician, and we will have to leave the top level discussion for them. But of course, we are at the different ministries discussing this and seeing how important it is.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. That's a great comment. You wanted to reflect, say.
Yeah. I made a mental note of your point about soft power in the context of science diplomacy, and obviously I think that's a very valid point, and it's something that we all project when we go out as diplomats in science policy. However, when we talk about a country like China, they're very sensitive towards this point, and I think it's the analysis of that situation that's difficult for me to make, and also because it happens in a context where China becomes more and more relevant to collaborate with, but more and more different. So complementarity, excellent. Compatibility, not so much. And soft power in general, sits very uncomfortably in that situation. So I think that's an issue that really needs further consideration. And then I also just wanted to make the point about, you mentioned that the scientists can't bear this on their own shoulders. I think, at least speaking from the Danish experience, this is what they feel that they are doing. So there's no support from management on whatever level, because it's always the other way around. Oh, so you're not in control of who you're collaborating with, but that's your problem, because I didn't approve it. I'm putting it a little bit, of course, on the pointy side, but it's just to say that my observation is that the scientists very often feel that they are alone in this respect and not necessarily supported. So I think we need to think about that and have mechanisms that do indeed support the scientists when they go out as science diplomats.
Just a short.
Please go ahead.
Soft power. I think that what's interesting is that from the EU perspective, this is science diplomacy is put into the context of soft power. So we can discuss why and how this, but it affects us as member states, of course. So we also have to be well informed about what is going on the EU level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are great conversation, but I still wanted to just ask the audience if there was somebody here who wanted just to, there, please.
Thank you. I'm Christopher Freiberg from Non Libre Group.
Micken. And please keep it short.
Thank you. I'm Christopher Freiberg from Mon Libre Group, Sweden. I would like to share an experience, very recent, even from yesterday evening, which touches upon this soft power of science diplomacy. The biggest nations of the world today, China in particular, they are now working extremely efficiently. They are not only using diplomacy of science, they're actually coming here to Europe and have big competitions where they gather a lot of innovation companies into a kind of global Olympics in innovation and technological development. So this is extremely efficient, and I would advise the European Union to work in a similar way. Really state of the art, very impressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. I'm afraid we're actually running out of time, and there will be opportunities to mix with the panels here if you have some additional questions. Thank you very much for this. And to finish, I'd like to invite up Tula for some finishing words.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting and very, very important discussion that is. And I think that, we did at EVA a few years back a trip to China. And we were very much exposed to these kind of questions of what to share and what to own and how we put these limits. And the message after we had discussed, this results of this trip is that, we say exclusion definitely is not going to be the answer. If you look at, how science works, how research collaboration works, there are many, many things, these global mega projects, looking at fusion energy or something like that, which is probably going to save us in the end. I mean, if we don't collaborate on those, if we don't share, then we exclude, and that is going to just cause more tensions. So therefore, I think that, I'm really happy that everybody seems to agree that we should be sharing. And now the question is, how do we manage also the threats? We have brains that are concentrating on threats and the fear of losing. How can we fight this fear of losing and try to concentrate on the opportunities? Thank you very much for your participation and your insights, and we will continue the discussion on the Mingle. Thank you very much.